My former toxic roommate was an absolute nightmare to live with and refused to pay her rent on time or even respect me and my husband while we were living together. But now, 3 years later after we moved out away from this crazy Karen, we come to find out that she is not only still following us, but also saying terrible things about me and my fiance. And at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. I'm a 24-year-old female, and 3 years ago, I moved in with my friend who we will call Karen. We had been friends for about a year, but had known each other and been acquaintances for roughly 10 years. This friend was known to be a little bipolar, but she respected me and knew that I had way clearer boundaries than her other friends. We moved in with my now fiance in a 2-bedroom apartment. We were paying 2/3 of the rent, while Karen paid 1/3. The first issue arose when she asked if she could move her dog in, and I said no problem. Well, I was working as an assistant manager for anywhere from 40 to 55 hours a week, and I would come home to dog pee and poop everywhere, and I literally mean everywhere. We're talking the floors, the couch, even the walls. The dog also chewed everything up and it got into the garbage. I would let him out and clean up the mess, and then I would inform Karen that she needed to take better care of her dog. Well, she demanded that her job, which she typically works 6 hours a day, was too much for her, and that it was my job to take care of her dog. Meanwhile, she constantly called off, or she would show up to work hours late. At one point, I refused to clean it. So at most, she would pick up the dog poop, but she wouldn't even scrub anything. I mean, I witnessed one of her friends literally sleep with her face next to an unscrubbed dog poop stain on the couch, and I just about vomited. The second big issue arose when second month's rent was due. I texted Karen and my fiance, who for the sake of the story, I'll call him Bear, and I had our rent ready, and if we could just get together to write a check to the renters, that would be great. Well, she told me the banks were closed, and she didn't have any money, as if the banks not being open somehow made up for her poor planning. So we had to rearrange our finances to cover her third of the rent. I texted her that we covered it for her, and that she owed us 1/3 of the rent. She replied a few hours later that her mommy paid it, so her rent for next month would be covered. I replied that would mean that my fiance and I were only 1/3 ahead, and she would still owe me for next month, as we were the ones that paid extra. Well, she argued and was adamant that we were wrong, and that she was not going to pay. Another issue involved the food in the house. In the first month that we lived there, we spent $600 on food to fill the house and pantry, while Karen shopped with me and bought equal amounts of food. I budget very well with food, and one way that I do that is by buying store brand products. Well, Karen kept snapping that she didn't like store brand and that I was pissing her off. I told her that what I buy for myself was none of her business, as we are both buying our own groceries. But then I caught her sending her boyfriend to work with my food, and we're talking like an entire 12-pack of something that I bought, and I definitely got very irritated. The food waste really ticked me off when one time I had friends over for a party, and I came out the next day to my food all thrown out or just shoved out of the fridge but still in containers. And Karen's only excuse was that there was no room for her food in the fridge, so she just emptied it completely. After 3 weeks, I ran out of $600 worth of food, and I had to yet again rearrange my budget to allow for more groceries. After this incident, petty and lazy stuff happened all the time. I tried to wash my clothes in our shared washer, and I would come back to my wet clothing soaking across the basement floor. We found a week-old rotisserie chicken in the microwave with maggots in it, and there was so much more, but honestly, it's just not worth my energy trying to type it out. After my clothing was found strewn across the floor, I came up really heated, and I said that my stuff better start getting respected. At which point, Karen's boyfriend tried to step up to me and my fiance, and I told him he had better watch himself. Karen then turned around and refused to look at me or talk to her boyfriend, but instead yelled that I needed to step up and clean up after Karen more because she was tired from work, as if I wasn't working way more than her. At this point, I agreed to sign the boyfriend's name, who we will call Steven, onto the lease. And I did this because it made it way easier for me to sign my name off of the lease. And I then informed Karen that I would be leaving as soon as possible. But then later on, I came home from work to my furniture on the front porch. I moved back in and I told Karen that she better not touch my stuff again before I move out. At which point she informed me that she paid rent early so I could leave since I didn't pay my share for that month. The very next day, I got a screen recording sent to me of a 15-minute Snapchat video of Karen's boyfriend going on a substance-fueled rant saying how he's gonna beat me up for basically standing up for myself against his girlfriend, and that my fiance was a big teddy bear, so if he tried to get in the way, he would fight him as well. He then went on a rant saying the house was a mess because it was my fault, and the dog mess was my responsibility. The whole video was a mess, and you could tell that he was very high, but it was more than enough to make us decide that we were just done. So I called my dad and I asked for help moving furniture. We showed up to our apartment and Steven was there, and that's when there was a massive altercation. Steven really got into it with Bear, so much so that I had to call the police because things really got bad. So the cops showed up and we gave our statements, and we had the cops watch while we took the rest of our belongings. And I wanted our statements taken so that my roommate couldn't manipulate the situation. And despite the altercation between my boyfriend and Steven, no charges were filed for either party. Karen has now made posts saying that it's on site as soon as she sees me, but I have blocked her on all social media and even went so far as to delete mutual friends that I had no interest in forcing to take sides. She has followed multiple social media platforms and has had friends comment on statuses saying awful things about me. Now, this is where things get really weird. I thought that maybe she was done obsessing over me for roughly 2 years now. I moved out and I became a mom, and I'm so excited to say that we are pregnant again with our second child. But recently, her fiance keeps coming up for the people you may know tab on my social media, and I got a notification saying that I may know him too. I felt like she was trying to follow me again, so I blocked him too. Well, lo and behold, a friend of mine came up to me and said that Karen was bragging that she found out the gender of my baby. And honestly, this is just such weird behavior. I feel like I will forever have a fan because no matter how hard I try to block her, I find out that she's still studying my life. And I'm honestly so sick of her, and I hope I never deal with her ever again. Wow, what a psychopath. Not only Karen, but also her boyfriend. Like, there are so many things that are wrong with this lady, but just to name a few, you are not responsible for her dog. That dog going to the bathroom everywhere and making an absolute mess, that is her responsibility. That's not something that you have to take care of in the slightest. So for her to sit there and be like, it is your responsibility, I'm too busy from work. But like, seriously, what work are you talking about? You work maybe 6 hours a day at that, and you're not even showing up for work, and you're showing up late. But even if that were the case and you had all this time taken away from you from your job, it is still this lady's responsibility to take care of her dog. That literally does not fall on anybody else's shoulders except for her. And it's so crazy to me that she's like, I already paid my rent for next month, so I don't have to pay you back for the rent I missed this month. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? You didn't pay for anything. We literally covered you for the rent that you refused to pay. Like, that part alone would drive me up a wall because I'm just like the original poster. I like to budget my money correctly, and I like to make sure I have money exactly where it needs to be. So for this Karen to not only steal your groceries and take advantage of you in paying the rent, like, that is just so unacceptable. So hopefully you can avoid this lady and her stupid crazy boyfriend, because both of these people sound completely unhinged, and the both of you absolutely do not deserve to be treated the way that they treated you. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My entitled in-law demands money back that my aunt gave out to the family in some kind of desperate ploy to steal from everybody. Here's what happened. Before we get started, all names in the story are fake. Okay, so my wife's Aunt Louise is a great lady. She and her husband lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and bought their home in the late 1970s. After her husband passed away, she sold her home for well over $1 million and moved back to live closer to her family where she grew up, which is a farming area in Southern California. She lives very frugally, so she doesn't really have to worry about money. Aunt Louise had 3 children, who are all now in their 40s and early 50s. The 2 oldest are nice, normal people, but her youngest, by the name of Kay, is a real piece of work. She meets all the criteria for a psychological diagnosis of narcissism. Aunt Louise just turned 70. She's really happy about it and decided to celebrate. She's a very kind and giving person, and celebrating to her means doing something nice for others. Aunt Louise has 3 children, 14 nieces and nephews, and 40 plus grandnieces and grandnephews. I don't know how much she sent to everybody, but based on what she sent to my wife, and knowing how much she likes to be fair, the nieces and nephews each received a check for about $1,000. And based on what she sent to our kids, I suspect that each grandniece and grandnephew received a check for $500. There was also a very kind and personalized note to each person, saying how much she loved them and imploring them to do something fun with this money, and that we should not use it to pay any bills. It was generous and sweet, and when a couple of the kids came by this weekend for a barbecue, we talked about Aunt Louise, their plans for the money, and as I suspect was Aunt Louise's intent, we had happy conversations about fun plans. Well, that's when the email came in. For background, Aunt Louise's daughter Kay audits her mother's finances that would make the IRS blush. Last Christmas, she berated her mother for vacationing to New York City with a friend, which, by the way, going to New York City at Christmas is something that Aunt Louise has always wanted to do. She has also frequently talked about plans for her inheritance, and all with her still very much alive mother sitting right next to her. Kay sent my wife and others an email claiming that her mother is suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's with a request. While we suspect this is Kay just being Kay, my wife still called Aunt Louise just in case. But all of this was news to Aunt Louise, who was completely lucid as always. Now here's the best part. In the email, Kay asked everybody to send the money they received from Aunt Louise over to Kay. She nobly volunteered to handle all the deposits herself to avoid being a burden on Aunt Louise, who is clearly too infirm to attend to such a taxing matter. Now, in light of the times that Kay has helped herself to Aunt Louise's money without permission, which is also known as stealing, I'm fairly convinced not a dime would have made it back to Aunt Louise. And I honestly cannot stand that woman and all the things that she puts my family through. Wow, that lady sounds like an absolute jerk. She literally tried to scam the entire family and be like, oh, send it back to me. It was a mistake. She's gonna need all that money back. Thanks. Like, first of all, if I got a check for $1,000, I either would have cashed it like right away or I would have already used it for something. And secondly, with someone like this lady who clearly has a sketchy past and is really just like a piece of work, there's no way I would ever agree to anything that she would request. So truly, I really hope that things work out for your family and you don't have to deal with Kay any longer, because her behavior, in my opinion, is completely unacceptable. An entitled guest shows up an hour late for their dinner reservation and then demands a manager when I don't give in to their every whim. Here's what happened. Many years ago, I worked at a Michelin star restaurant on Fulton and Morgan in Chicago. Now, it wasn't the flagship restaurant, and at the time, it didn't have an active star, but it is still in the Michelin Guide, and it's like the casual feeder restaurant for the rest of the restaurant group. And it was also in the middle of COVID. So in Chicago, there was a law that you had to be vaccinated in order to dine at a restaurant, which didn't hurt our business but made our job a lot harder. Whenever someone would come in, I would have to say the following: "Hi, welcome in. My name is such and I'll be your server tonight. But before we begin, can I see your proof of vaccine?" Once they show us that, I would then start getting their order. We would get them something to drink, we would check their IDs, we would check and see if there's any allergies or dietary restrictions, and then we would go from there. There was also a very strict time limit on a table, and we had to close at 10 o'clock. And it's not like we stopped taking people in at 10. Instead, we stopped taking people in at about 9 o'clock. And we were mostly booked for reservations anyways. And I'm talking an average of 200 to 250 covers a night, with each table having 2 to 3 reservations booked. Now, while working there, I had the pleasure of some very unique opportunities, including rushing a family of walk-ins through a 3-course meal with a dessert, because they only had about 45 minutes before we needed the table back, and we were well aware of that. But also, we dealt with some people who really thought they were so much better than everybody else around them. A man and his girlfriend came in, and they have a reservation for 3, and they're waiting to order. Their third, the guy's sister, just isn't there yet. I try to get them to order something, but they want to wait. And I'm just like, okay, but they ended up waiting for like an hour before their third person finally arrives. Now, their third person was this gorgeous woman, and I was very relieved to see her join the group. So I go over and do my thing. I flirt a little for fun, and I ask them for an order. Now, at this time, we were nearly closing. Everyone else in the restaurant has ordered, and they say they need some time to look things over, and I give it to them. Well, when I come back, they still haven't looked. My boss then tells me to get their orders. I try again, but they say they still need time as they're catching up. But then the chef tells me to get their order. So I go over and I explain to them that the chef needs their order. And I probably say just that sentence because I've worked here for like a month and I'm not comfortable being bossy in this way. So my boss tells me the kitchen wants to leave and I need to get their order or else they're not going to get one. So I explain to them that the kitchen will be closing soon and they haven't even picked up their menus off the table. So the last 2 guys in the kitchen start to close down, and the kitchen is an open view kitchen with seating around it that's maybe 5 feet from their table, and the girl from New York is facing them. Now, how do I know that she's from New York? Well, the kitchen is closing and she waves me over demanding the right to order. I explain that legally their table reservation is only for 2 hours because of the COVID restrictions. I explain that they've extended that stay past the point where they're allowed to have the table, and I also explain that the chefs are leaving and that I have asked them to order half a dozen times and that the kitchen has to leave. This woman then looks at me and says, "Well, I'm from New York." But I respond by saying, "Okay, well, this is Chicago." Well, when I said that, she demands to speak to the owner because she saw him walk in and he had been working on a menu update while also wanting to step in and say hi to the kitchen. Now, the entire time I worked there, I heard him speak maybe like 5 times, and I saw him maybe once a week when the COVID surges weren't bad for reasons that would make sense if you knew him. I tell her that he, like the rest of our staff, staff has left, so I get her a manager. And I think we got them a dessert or something like that, but I'm not really sure. This woman had gone from being my favorite person in the restaurant that night to being a nightmare trying to get me fired just because she couldn't understand the fact that we had an operating procedure. The chefs that started packing up was our head chef and our sous chef, and he didn't really like me, but he knew that I wanted to do a good job, so he begrudgingly accepted me for the most part. But we were definitely not friends. But also, he had been there at least since noon, maybe even earlier, and had that schedule 5 days a week, and came in on his days off most of the time. This is a man who just wants to cook steaks and then go home. Like on an average week there, I served a famous chef stopping in because he was friends with the owner, not to mention the local celebrities, vineyard owners, CEOs, etc. A chef once drove from St. Louis to dine with us after getting off work on a Friday, then came back the next Friday to try more of our menu. And yet this woman somehow decides that she is the most important person that I have ever served and that has ever sat in our restaurant, and that she doesn't have to follow the same rules. I mean, she even tried to get the owner over here to fire me because I did what my boss required of me. I went from wanting to try to join them afterwards to being like, okay, this is why everybody hates New Yorkers, and I honestly hope I never deal with anybody like that ever again. Okay, for starters, I totally agree with the original poster when they have someone like this who appears to be really nice and wonderful, but then at the slightest inconvenience, they turn into a monster and they try to get you fired. But while we're on that subject, in my opinion, I think it is incredibly unprofessional to start flirting with a guest and also insinuate that you want to join them afterwards once you get off the clock. That's really weird in my opinion, and I don't think that's okay in the slightest. I've worked in restaurants and I just don't think that's a good idea, and I think you're only setting yourself up for failure in some kind of way. But honestly, that's just a minor grievance in my opinion, because the way this lady acted towards you was super inappropriate. Seriously, not only was she late to her appointment for this restaurant, but also the entire group just sat there and did nothing the entire time. They waited and chatted or did something else instead of ordering their food at the end of the night. If I was late for a restaurant reservation, I would be absolutely apologetic to the staff and be like, okay, I'm gonna order really quick, I'm so sorry. But instead, this lady strolls in and doesn't even bat an eye. So that, along with her trying to get you fired, in my opinion, is super toxic, and you definitely did not deserve to deal with that. This next story came from the Am I the Jerk subreddit. Check the links in the description if you would like to submit your own story. Am I the jerk for canceling my family vacation trip after my brother blatantly disrespected me and refused to apologize? Here's what happened. I'm a 36-year-old male, and I have a 30-year-old younger brother who we will call Jake. And when it comes to Jake, he has always had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Growing up, Jake was rebellious and often got into trouble, which strained our relationship. But over the years, I've tried to mend fences and be a supportive brother. A few months ago, I came into a significant bonus at work, and I decided to treat my family to a luxurious vacation. I planned a week-long trip to a tropical resort, covering all expenses for my parents, Jake, and his girlfriend, who we will call Laura. Everyone was excited, and we started making preparations. I put a lot of effort into organizing the trip, including booking activities and making restaurant reservations. I also took care of the logistics, ensuring everyone would have a seamless experience. Despite our rocky past, I was genuinely looking forward to spending quality time with Jake and the rest of the family. About 2 weeks before the trip, we all gathered at our parents' house for dinner. During the meal, Jake started making snide comments about my job and my lifestyle. He insinuated that I was trying to buy the family's love with this trip and made several disrespectful remarks about how I handled my money. I tried to brush off his comments, but they just kept escalating. At one point, Jake accused me of being a show-off and said that I was only doing this trip to boost my own ego, and Laura laughed at his jokes, clearly supporting his behavior. I was hurt and very angry, but I kept my cool for the sake of our parents. After dinner, I pulled Jake aside and I told him that his comments were out of line and very hurtful, but he just brushed me off, saying I was too sensitive and that I needed to chill out. I was stunned by his lack of remorse and the clear disrespect that he showed. I went home that night feeling upset and very disrespected. I talked it over with my wife, who suggested that I reconsider the trip if Jake continued to treat me this way. I didn't want to ruin the family's excitement, but I also didn't want to spend a week being disrespected. Well, the next day, I called a family meeting to discuss the situation. I calmly explained how hurtful Jake's comments were, and I asked him to please give me an apology. But Jake doubled down, saying that he was just joking and that I was overreacting. My parents tried to mediate, but it was clear Jake had no intention of apologizing. Feeling disrespected and unsupported, I made the difficult decision to cancel the trip. I informed the family that I could not, in good conscience, spend a week with someone who treated treated me with such blatant disrespect. My parents were disappointed but understood my decision. Jake, however, was furious and accused me of ruining the family's plan out of spite. Since then, our relationship has been even more strained. Jake has been bad-mouthing me to other family members and friends, painting me as the villain. And right now, I'm left wondering if I overreacted and should have just gone through with the trip for the sake of the family. What should I do? Honestly, in my opinion, I don't think you're in the wrong for deciding to cancel this trip, because Jake was definitely out of line. He was saying things that were very hurtful, and essentially he was making fun of you and really coming after you for no good reason. Like, this guy does know that you're paying for the entire trip, right? Why on earth would he bite the hand that feeds him, especially when you're trying to do something nice for the whole family? So no, I don't think you're in the wrong for choosing to step away, because the way he acted, in my opinion, was completely unacceptable. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.